On today's show, an early look at the 2024 NHL Draft, and host of Locked On Sharks, JD Young, hops on to discuss Tristan Robbins, William Eklund, and many more. All coming up on Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, I break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kalakash. I'm a scout and prospect analyst across multiple platforms, including this one. We've got a great show for you today. First and foremost, we'll be taking a very, very early look at the 2024 NHL Draft class. I'm going to be breaking down the top 5 of that class with 5 honorable mentions as well. It's early on, but this class is very interesting, and I really want to review it for you guys. And then later on, the host of Locked On Sharks, JD Young, will be on to discuss the various Sharks prospects across the board, from the AHL to junior. So that's going to be very interesting. Make sure to stick around to the end. But before we get into any of this, make sure to like and subscribe if you're watching on YouTube and like what you're seeing. And if you're listening along on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. It's always very much appreciated. So let's get right into it with the honorable mentions. Now, there are a couple guys that have scouted a lot because they play on teams that already scout for the 2023 draft or for drafted prospects already. But some of these guys have only watched a couple times. So let's get right into it with these honorable mentions. We have got Artyom Levchunov, a right-handed defenseman who plays in the USHL. He's a big right-handed D with a lot of offensive upside. That's going to give him a lot of value at the draft table. He's kind of defensively limited. He doesn't make the best decisions when, defending off the rush or when he needs to sort of evaluate his own positioning, but he's got, a lot of physicality, a lot of offensive upside. I think he could be a very interesting pickup in the 5 to 10 range. Then we've got Berkeley Catton of the Spokane Chiefs. He's actually second in points per game on the whole team as a 16-year-old, which is very impressive, even in the WHL. For me, he projects really well as a top 6 energy center. He brings a lot of drive, a lot of intensity to the game, which is something that a lot of teams will be looking for. It's probably going to be your second line center down the road, but I thought he definitely deserved a mention in this range. He's someone with a lot of offensive attributes that'll be projectable. Then we look at Henry Muse, an agile right-handed defenseman of the Ottawa 67s. He's actually second among the 67s defensemen in scoring behind Jack Mateer. He's got great puck skills and a very polished breakout game. Not much outside of that, but I think those elements alone will sort of carry him to a top 10 role. Now we look further on at Jacob Chromiak, a smart, poised defenseman with great puck skills. He does need some defensive refinement, but he already has 3 games of pro experience under his belt in Czechia this season, and he's playing pretty well for the Sudbury Wolves since getting transferred with 7 points in 19 games, which isn't too bad at all. And then finally, a player I really don't see mentioned a lot at all in prospect circles, and that's Konsta Helenius. He is a right winger from Finland. He's got 28 points in 19 U20 games. So he's playing above his age group and producing exceptionally. He's even got 2 points in 4 Finnish Liga games, so they're top pro level. So he's playing above his age and playing really well. He's got great hands, great skating. He's really good along the boards with his physical mechanics and in order to, pry defensemen off of pucks and win board battles and stuff like that. So he's been really impressive. But now for the top 5, I wanted to start with a player from the Muskegon Lumberjacks. It's Sacha Boisvert, Trois-Rivières, Quebec native, who has applied his trade in the USHL so far. He's been doing really well. He's a big center who doesn't exclusively rely on his size, which is always promising. I think he's got 5 goals and 5 assists in 13 games. So he's up there in terms of points. He's producing pretty well. He's got soft hands. He's got very smart off-puck positioning, both offensively and defensively. I think he does need to add some deception, some look-off passes and that kind of thing to his arsenal. But there's also the fact that he'll rely on his shot a lot and take shots from distance instead of finding better options in the offensive zone. But he projects really well because of his skill set. Smooth hands, smooth skater. Not the quickest or most agile, but it's a very fluid stride. He's also got a very mature off-puck game. So those two elements, his skill set and his off-puck game, are probably going to carry him to a top 10 pick in the 2024 draft. Then we look at pick number 4, and that's Tanner Howe of the Regina Pats. I've discussed him already on this podcast. He is one of Connor Bedard's most frequent line mates. He's got 40 points in 27 games for the Regina Pats. He's only behind Connor Bedard on his team. He's both quick physically and quick mentally. So he's got a lot of pace to his game in terms of his agility, his top speed, all that. But he also thinks the game very quickly, which makes him a great match for Bedard. He's also got a lot of intensity to his game. I think that people are going to overestimate the effect that Bedard had on him in this year, and you're really going to see a different player next year once Bedard is out of there and he's a main play driver, because he does have very good puck skills, a lot of intelligence, a lot of pace, a lot of intensity, and all that. So all that combines to make a very lethal package, and I think he's definitely worth a top 5 pick. Now, for pick number 3, we've got a USNTDP product in Cole Eiserman. He's played all over the place, both at center and wing, but I think he projects much better at center. He's a sharpshooter, very lethal scorer with good hands. He's 5'11", 194 pounds, so he's already pretty stocky for his age, and it shows in his game. He's very physical. He has a mean streak to him. It's just very impressive to watch him go about it. He's also pretty good defensively, understands his assignments, defends off the rush really well, back checks with effort. There are so many areas of his game that are polished already that he's in contention for the top 2, but I think he just gets outranked by the 2 guys ahead of him. So at number 2, we have got Aron Kiviharju, a left-handed Finnish defenseman. He's already got so much sort of hype around him and promise around him. I think he is a top 2 talent in the 2024 NHL Draft. But there's one name ahead of him that I just can't knock off. But to isolate Kiviharju, incredibly smart. He's got a lot of offensive upside. He's got a great shot. He's got even better playmaking. All that combines extremely well to sort of create a very good package of skills that should make him a very solid offensive defenseman at the next level. Will his defensive game translate? It's too early to tell. He's still got a lot of refinement ahead of him, and defensemen tend to take more time to develop. But he's very promising in his own sort of offensive abilities. That's something that isn't deniable. And, despite the lack of scoring right now in the U20 and Liga, I mean, he's got 8 points, 8 assists in 10 games at the U20 level, and he's got no points so far in 8 games in the Liga. But it's just a matter of time before the production translates, because he's doing all the right things offensively. Then we move on to the first overall pick in the 2024 NHL Draft in these very early rankings. It's going to be Macklin Celebrini, a center of the Chicago Steel. He's Canadian-born. To put it very simply, he's got the best hands in the draft. He's got the best shot in the draft, and he's among the best skaters in the draft. He can do pretty much everything at an elite level. And if you look at his production, he's got 13 goals and 10 assists for 23 points in 15 games for the Chicago Steel, which is a better draft -1 year point per game pace than Adam Fantilli, Andrei Svechnikov, Kyle Connor, and a lot of very, very good players. In fact, he's 6th overall in the league's history in points per game the year before their draft year. So it's just very impressive to watch him go about it. He's just been very, very good. He scored a between the legs goal for Team Canada in the U20 in the U17 World Showcase. So, he's definitely got that elite skill set, and he could very well be one of the top scorers in the NHL a couple of years from now. But that's it for our first segment. Now we're going to go into my discussion with JD Young about the Sharks' various prospects. San Jose's got a very deep pool, so we've got a lot to discuss. So we'll get right into it right after these messages.
Do you like betting? BetOnline.net is your number one source for any wager that interests you. From the NFL to the NBA to the MLB, and even NCAA football, UFC, golf, anything you like, they have you covered. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth analysis on every game on their website or app. They're, of course, a great source for all of your sports wagering information with live betting, so you can keep up with bets as they unfold. They've got up to the minute scores for every sport out there. They're the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite games and events. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet online, where the game starts.
All right, so I'm here with JD Young of Locked On Sharks. So let's start this off. JD Young, how are you doing, and how are the Sharks doing, especially?
I'm doing great. My voice is a little raspy right now. I lost my voice. I went to the Dolphins Niners game this weekend and
Uh,
lost my voice. So voices, it's day to day right now, but we're getting better. But the Sharks are bad to terrible.
yeah.
So been enjoying the prospect life and tracking all the Sharks prospects this year. So.
Yeah, for sure. So let's get into it with the San Jose Barracuda. Now, there's been a lot of hype around the prospect pool that's there. There's a lot of new guys that have come in and are kind of carrying the torch. Mainly, there's William Eklund, Thomas Bordello, and Tristan Robbins. Which one of the three has impressed you the most, and why?
I would say Tristan Robbins out of those three, right? Bordello and Eckland, we've seen play professional hockey of some sort, right? Eckland playing SHL, and then he got a couple games last year with the Sharks. Bordello made a big impression with the Sharks last season in the final 8 games. But Robbins, I think, has kind of been the forgotten about guy of that 2020 draft class. And I know Eckland's the 2021, but of the Sharks' top prospects, he's kind of been the forgotten one. And I think he's hit the ground so quickly and so smoothly with the Barracuda. That's been really impressive. And it's the way he can really kind of play with his teammates. And we know Eckland and Bordello are more about kind of thinking the game and being distributors. I know Bordello, he is leading the Barracuda in goals right now, but the way Robbins fits with those guys and the way he gets his shot off, we talked about on my podcast on how kind of special his shot could be, just because of the way he skates and the way he's able to get it off so quickly. But playing with a guy like Eklund or playing with a guy like Bordello, where they can find him at anywhere on the ice, and then he's able to get that shot off so quickly to beat really, really good goaltenders so far in the AHL. So I think his development, we saw him dominate with Saskatoon, but now being able to do that in the AHL and hopefully soon one day in the NHL, I think his is the most surprising and kind of the biggest surprise of the early season for the Barracuda.
Absolutely. So we've talked about, on your podcast when I made my appearance there, which I will be linking down below. I talked specifically about Tristan Robbins' skating and how it feeds into his shot and how those two things combine together to make him just a much more lethal goal scorer than someone who just has a heavy release. The way that Robbins manipulates his mechanics and adjusts his posture and his skates in order to get shots off from any position, and the wide arsenal he has of shots has really been impressive. So I definitely agree with you there in terms of Robbins being the more impressive of the three. And I wanted to sort of ask you about William Eklund specifically, because he was supposed to head into the season as almost a surefire NHLer. I mean, he had his appearance last season, and the expectation for him this year was to see him in the NHL and at least half the season, if not the full season. So what has made that not a reality for Eklund so far this year?
I think Mike Greer and David Quinn, with Mike Greer coming in, that was always kind of the issue with the Sharks was they would have to rush or rely on prospects too early for them to come in and contribute right away. And granted, the Sharks haven't had a prospect like William Eklund since I would assume, Timo Meier is probably the high first round pick where you could look to and be like, okay, this guy is a potential game changer. But, Mike Greer, he went out this offseason and he made it a mission to kind of fill that bottom 6 void of the Sharks, where it's for the past couple of years, it's been either prospects who aren't ready or just guys who aren't kind of fit for the role, and making it a little bit harder for these guys to just kind of step into these NHL roles. And, I had penciled in William Eklund all off season. I thought with a year in the SHL, I know he had a terrible season with Djurgården last year, but he made the Sharks last season, and it's not like this team is much more talented this year than it was last year. But I mean, it's one of those things. They did that to kind of protect these guys and not ask too much of them too early. And I think he's had a very solid start with the Barracuda, and he's gotten to do everything. He's playing, top line minutes. He's playing all situations, working on his power play, working on his penalty kill. His penalty kill is amazing to watch, just the way he's so relentless in the defensive zone of, on his forecheck, making guys have to kind of pass and do things before they're ready to. And I think we see that with Barracuda coach John McCarthy is, if you're not scoring, what else can you do for me? And he's been working on that toolkit and adding those pieces. So that way, when he gets to the NHL and if he's not scoring right away, you're not contributing offensively, what else can you do for me? That way, you're not just playing 5 minutes a night and then hanging out on the either in the press box or just hanging out on the bench for 5 minutes because you haven't rounded out those other skills.
100%. And that's the main sort of takeaway from this is Eckland's combination of pace, intensity, and intelligence. Those three things for me are the pillars of any good prospect. And if you have those three things, you're usually adaptable enough that if you're placed in a situation that you're not used to, like, regular penalty killing time in the AHL, it's not as big as an adjustment as it is for other prospects. So it's been very impressive for me to watch Eckland and see his progression defensively. It's very surprising. Like you said, I mean, the Sharks aren't a better team this year than they were last year. Not by any wide margin, at least. So it's just about sort of tempering expectations with these prospects and accepting that sometimes the AHL is the best place for them right now. And I think that's definitely Eckland's case.
Yeah, I mean, and like you can see that with their transactions, right? I mean, this today, or as you guys listen to this yesterday, that they had some injuries. Matt Nieto goes off. They bring up CJ Cease, and it's like, okay, like he hasn't been doing too much in the AHL, but it's just he's one of those guys who he's played in the NHL before. He's played in the NHL. He can, kind of come in, and it's again, you're not asking William Eklund to kind of come in and save the franchise right away. You're letting him kind of boil. And I think you'll see these guys sooner rather than later, especially as the Sharks start to kind of trade off at the deadline. And at some point you're going to have to rip the Band-Aid off at some point with them. But yeah, right now it's been preaching patience with the prospects.
100%. So a bit, related to the Eklund discussion we've been having, what makes Thomas Bordello and William Eklund different prospects? How do they think the game differently?
Yeah, I mean, with Eklund, you can see where, just how he kind of can see everything going on at once. And his shiftiness is something like we saw glimpses of it. His spins, of course, his famous spins. He's a spinny boy. But just the way he can turn and react and kind of make space that way compared to Bordello, who's a little bit more kind of north-south. But he, I still think Bordello, his ability to kind of see the game and find open teammates, he can be a little bit more kind of north-south with it. But Eklund, I think with his ability, like I said, his shiftiness, especially behind the net, right, where he'll have a defender on him, start going one way, turn the other way on a dime, and then all of a sudden the defender's basically, dropped his jock strap because he just can't keep up with them. And then Eklund also knows, hey, I have Robbins, streaming towards the net. Let me get a pass off to Robbins, or finding the D-man on the point to help kind of reset the play. Or, we've seen that type of skill of Eklund just being able to use his creativity and then his shiftiness to avoid defenders or make his space. And while Bordello, he can create space his own way, again, of kind of seeing how things are going to react beforehand. You can kind of see that, like his ability to know where guys are going to be. And like I said, he's a little bit more north and south with this game, which I think coaches are probably going to like more than Eklund's game. But his ability, we saw this too last year with the Sharks, of, again, knowing where guys are, where he's behind the net, and just finding those guys open in front to create those great chances in those high danger slot areas. So different styles of player, but they both kind of get to the same point, just different ways.
Yeah, for me, what it seems like is Eklund is a lot more sort of, he triangulates a bit more, and Bordello is more of the crash and bang, create havoc, create chaos. I think that Eklund's game is a bit more meticulous, a bit more calculated, and it's very interesting because they both of those playing styles have their merits. Both of those playing styles have their strengths, and it's going to be very interesting to watch them, move up the ranks and how their development is affected by their different playing styles. But that's it for our first segment. Now we're going to go into Ryan Merkley, what his progression has been like, and a couple more questions right after these messages. All right, so we're back with JD Young of Locked On Sharks to discuss some Sharks prospect. Now, I wanted to hop into Ryan Merkley because for me, he's a very interesting case study, a very interesting prospect. Heading out of junior, he had a lot of skill, a lot of manipulability, and a lot of pace to his game, and all that was very interesting. But for some reason, so far up until this weekend, there was a lot of struggle in Merkley's game. Now, what's that about, and what's the weekend been like for him?
Yeah, I mean, I think going back with Merkley, right? It's for him the offensive, skill is there, and we see that all the time where he's can do things that very few players can do in creating offense. But the defense has never been his forte. We've seen him progress defensively, and I think he's becoming a much better defenseman. He's never going to be like a shutdown defenseman, and that's not why you drafted Ryan Merkley, right? You didn't draft him to be a shutdown defenseman. You drafted him to help provide offense and be kind of an Erik Karlsson light type of player, right?
Yeah.
And you wonder with him if he's one of those guys who the pandemic really kind of hurt his development, right? Mm-hmm. His first season in San Jose was the 2020 year, right? Remember, San Jose was one of the strictest areas, and the Barracuda and the Sharks spent the first, 6 weeks not at home. They were in Arizona. Of course, you had the Zoom meetings and isolated and stuff like that. And Merkley kind of seems like one of those kind of buddy guys where he's kind of likes to be around people. And you wonder if that just really kind of hurt his development type of thing. So unfortunately, that's just how some people are, right? They just so that's just me guessing. That's me just kind of reading the situation, right? Last year had a great start with the Barracuda. Started the season with the Barracuda. Sharks had some injuries. They had COVID issues as well, and then Ryan Merkley had to play a lot more NHL games than I think the team wanted him to play. I think they wanted him to have that full year in the Barracuda to really kind of work on his defensive game. And also with Bob Boughner, he was very much I'm going to bench Ryan Merkley anytime he makes a mistake type of guys.
I've heard.
Yes, there was a game against the Lightning where the Sharks were down like 6-0. Ryan Merkley makes a bad pinch, trying to provide some offense. Puck squirts by him, leads to a breakaway. Tampa scores in the game 7-0, and Ryan Merkley gets benched the next game. And it's like, what are you doing here, guys? Like, the Sharks were a worst team last year offensively, and he was trying to provide some offense, especially with Erik Karlsson missing a ton of time last season. And this year, we see with the Barracuda, he kind of a brand new team, right? You have new head coach, new front office, a lot of new pieces, especially in the forward group and in the defensive group too. They went out and made sure to kind of sign some guys like Derek Pouliot, guys like that who've kind of, again, been around the system. But especially in the forward group, you have the entire 2020 draft class here. You have William Eklund, just a lot of new pieces. And those guys are kind of still gelling and starting to figure things out. But you're seeing that with Merkley, where his big issue before was, okay, I'm going to do something really cool, and then I'm going to try to do one more thing that I probably can't get away with, but I'm going to try to do it anyway, especially in the NHL. And, he would make a sweet deke on somebody, going through the neutral zone on a transition, and then try to, kind of make another play on the blue line, and then gets the puck poked away from him. And you're seeing that he's working on that, like, okay, I did something cool here. Let's just leave it at that type of thing. Let me pass it to somebody else. And he's been working on that. And you're kind of seeing that part of his game work itself out here. And I think too, with him, is having the right partner, right? You're going to need somebody who's much more defensively responsible. Ryan Merkley, you go create offense, do fun stuff like that. And then just having a more responsible defenseman. And, we're seeing that kind of work out with him right now. So I think he's been having a great kind of working towards it. This weekend, he had a nice 3-point game for the Barracuda in their teddy bear toss game. But I think, again, just kind of being a little bit more patient with him. I know he's a little bit older prospect. I know he's 22, and that's the death nail for prospects, right? If you haven't made it by the NHL by 22, just throw you away. You're useless. But no, he's. I think for him, you have to kind of give him a little bit more runway, especially as a defensive prospect, and what's happened the last 2 years of him being rushed maybe a little bit too soon, and now he's kind of finding his footing right now. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what I find interesting in Merkley's game is first, defensemen tend to take a bit more time to develop. It does take a lot of time to figure out the defensive game at the NHL level and
Mhm.
understand how to deal with the pace of play at that level. But what I really like about Merkley is just still experimenting, is still trying new things, and experimentation is the best way to develop new skills, in my opinion. So it's definitely a promising part of his game. I'm not sure how he pans out at the end of the day, but if he keeps up, trying new things, experimenting, learning by trial and error, I think he'll be fine.
Yeah, I
What do
think
you?
if we kind of set the expectations as if he's a solid second pair defenseman who can run your power play too, especially if you have Eric Carlson.
Mhm,
If that's kind of your expectation for him, instead of being this kind of again Eric Carlson light type of player, I
mhm.
think you're going to be happy with him. I think right now it's just kind of managing expectations with him.
For sure. So moving on to this next question, I asked this for any of our squad casts, any of guests from different teams podcasts. I always ask this, which is, what is the biggest need in the prospect pool? And you tell me that, and I'll tell you who would be the best fit.
I think the Sharks kind of have two, right? They spent a lot of time, especially the last couple drafts, focusing on that forward, and you've seen they have a lot of promising pieces, but they still don't have that like one kind of game changing, game breaking type of player who could potentially be a 40 goal scorer. So I know, I mean, believe me, I've Fantilli or Bedard, like one of those guys I would love, but
Yeah.
the Sharks are probably still going to be in that kind of 5, 6, 7 range. So give me somebody good there.
5, 6, 7, a good scorer. I don't know about 40 goals, but I think Edward Chalet would probably be a very, very good complementary top line player, who's going to bring a lot of energy, a lot of intelligence, puck skills, all that good stuff. If you're looking at centers, maybe Zach Benson would be an option. He doesn't have the 30 or 40 goal upside, but his playmaking is outstanding,
Mhm.
and he would probably be the Sharks' best prospect from one day to the other. And that's saying something given how high I am on William Eklund. In his draft year, he was my first overall pick. So that gives an idea of how high I am on Eklund. And when I talk about Zach Benson like that, it's saying something. Later, lower down, you'll find the 30 to 40 goal wingers more in the 10 to 20 range in terms of
Mhm.
upside. They're just a lot more risky and a lot more sort of, they're more specialists than anything
Yep.
else, like Colby Barlow, Casper Haltonen, Matthew Wood would be an option. I'd even say, if you really want, a 30 to 40 goal scorer and you're picking 5 to 10, Braden Yeager would be a great option. He's a center, but he could definitely score 35 to 40 goals. So that's one guy I would, out of all the guys I mentioned, I think the best fit for the Sharks, given what they need in terms of goal scoring, would be Braden Yeager.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense for them, right? You know, they've done. You have Eklund, you have Bordello. Those are gonna be your kind of playmaker guys. You
Mhm.
need some guys who can finish, and they drafted Daniel Gushin, and he's starting to come into his own with the Barracuda. But I mean, we
Mhm.
we see in the NHL nowadays, it's how many goals can you score?
Yeah.
You can play great defense and stuff, but at some point, you still have to put the puck in the net. And
Mhm.
having as many of those guys as possible would be great. I'm going to ask,
100%.
try to get a second
Mhm.
one. The Sharks need a blue chip defensive prospect. I know this draft is not probably the greatest for that, but if the,
Mhm.
the Sharks are probably going to be, picking high in the second round, or if not, getting a late first round pick at the trade deadline,
Mhm.
you got somebody for me?
Well, I talked about it in the first segment of this very show. This is the draft to the 2024 draft is the draft for defensemen. There are easily 4 or 5 of them that could go in the top 10, which have a lot of value, especially as right-handed blue liners. But if we're talking 2023, the two I'd look at if I'm the Sharks are either Caden Price of the Kelowna Rockets or Lucas Dragicevic of the Tri-City Americans, both in the WHL. In Price, you've got a very, very intelligent defender
Mhm.
who is kind of average or above average at best across all puck skills boards in terms of shooting, passing, stick handling, even defending. And in Lucas Dragicevic, you've got an outstanding stick handler, an offensive dynamo, but who still has some refinement to do both in his own zone and in terms of decision making. Because sometimes, there are games where he looks like a blue chip top 10 prospect, and there are other games where he doesn't look like a first rounder. So that's the difference between those two guys. I think developing consistency with Dragicevic would be easier in terms of getting a top pair defender versus Caden Price, who has a very high ceiling given his intelligence, but First, he's left-handed, which does offer less value at the draft table, so he could slip into the 20s. But on top of that, the puck skills aren't refined. It's just the brain is there with Price. Currently, I'm higher on Price than Dragicevic, but in terms of fit for what the Sharks are looking for, I think Dragicevic would be a better fit.
Perfect.
So yeah, now moving on, I want to finish this up with one last question for you. Who's your favorite non-professional prospect, so outside of the NHL and AHL?
Yeah, I mean, Eckland's my favorite prospect. I've been very much on the manifested Eckland to San Jose, save the franchise, as some people would say. But can't pick him. So two guys I really like. Cam Lund, who's having a great season over in Northeastern. Really tore it up in the prospect. One of those guys, I think he can shoot. We saw that, especially on the prospect, the scrimmage. Just got selected for the Team USA camp, so excited to kind of see his progression this season. Hopefully he makes Team USA. We can get to kind of get a taste of him at the World Juniors playing some quality hockey. And then Matthias Havlid, who we have not gotten a chance to really watch this year for Linköping, which I screwed up their name. I always screw up their announcement, but it's okay. He's been dealing with a back injury, but I think he's one of those guys where in a couple of years when he makes the jump, I think you're going to see him quickly play in the NHL, just because I think he's such a smooth defenseman. His skating, not just like up and down or north and south, but east and west as well, is I think he's going to quickly come in and just, again, kind of be one of those second pair defenseman guys who are just going to, play 20, 25 minutes a night and you're not going to have to worry about him. So I'm really excited for him. Can't wait to see his progression and hopefully him get healthy here soon. So.
Oh yeah, 100%. Havlid is a favorite of mine as well. That's going to be it for today's episode. Thank you very much for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, thank you for listening. If you're listening to us on one of your favorite podcasting platforms, JD, just remind the people where they can find you and your podcast.
You can find me on Twitter making terrible jokes and hoping Aaron Judge signs any day now at my fry hole. You can also find the show wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Odyssey, all those places, on YouTube as well at Locked On Sharks, and on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Locked On Sharks as well.
Perfect. Yeah, and same for us. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Odyssey, Apple Podcasts, everywhere. On Twitter, you can find us at LO_NHL Prospects, and you can find me personally at HattieK_Scouting. If you want to be part of our mailbags and, ask me some questions that I can feature on the show, you can find me there. I post weekly about that. But this has been Locked On NHL Prospects with Hattie Kalakash and JD Young, and I hope you tune in next time.